Our research team was charged with the task of attempting to recover parts of the African American experience in antebellum, Williamson County, Texas. However, the simple truth is that there is no definitive African American experience. There are, and have been, multitudes of African American experiences. Our work has been dedicated to a variety of factors which would have influenced those experiences. Of course, our attempts here to recover a bit more of this local history will be riddled with unfillable gaps. For example, when we came across the original bills of sale of slaves in the Georgetown County Clerk's office, we discovered an entry by Thomas Curry, who was a clerk at the time, describing an enslaved man named Anthony. Anthony had been reportedly jailed for a full month, from April 2nd, 1858 to April 29th, before the slaveholder returned to claim him. Despite these details, we were unable to find any other information regarding Anthony, or why he was jailed, or why it took so long for a slaveholder to come for him. These sorts of gaps are often, unfortunately, impassable now. Many enslaved African Americans suffered degradation and violence as described in such slave narratives as Harriet Jacobs' Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl and Ron Tyler and Lawrence Murphy's anthology, The Slave Narratives of Texas. Those African Americans not enslaved, according to Randolph Campbell's An Empire for Slavery, existed in a gray zone between slavery and freedom. However, according to Dylan Pendergrass' article, Writing Slavery's History, early scholars were limited to the white perspective prior to 1865, which raised questions concerning the legitimacy of the histories recorded. Many primary sources approach slaves as passive, non-speaking people. Thus, we turn to the George Washington Carver Museum and Cultural Center's curator, Bernadette Pfeiffer, for her opinion.
You, as Caucasian, could say, well, I visited this plantation, and all of the slaves seemed so contented, and they were just so well behaved, and I heard them singing, and they just seemed just contented with where they were. In fact, they were smiling, dancing, and they seemed very happy. But what is the underline of all of that? You, in oral histories, you may find that, one, we sang because we really didn't feel that we could communicate with each other and sit down and have a conversation. And so then we just sang our messages. We sang our conversations. And why then would I not be or give the appearance that I'm happy? I am in a situation that I can't change.
The religious experience was also of the highest importance for black citizens in Georgetown, with Wesley Chapel, founded in 1869, and Macedonia Baptist Church, founded in 1881, as the primary places of worship. And it is through the histories of these two churches, detailed in Clara Scarborough's Land of Good Water, Williamson County, Texas history, that we may begin to better understand the unique importance of religion to the African American experiences of the antebellum era as well. The churches were built by the sweat and determination of the congregation themselves, including children. Despite the prejudice, discrimination, and restricted resources available to the black community during the 19th century, the construction of a house of worship was still deemed vital enough to the African American community to coordinate the effort, time, and resources necessary. From this, we may deduce that religion also held exceptional significance for the antebellum African American community. They first held outdoor services, which were presided over by a traveling reverend. Later on, the original churches were constructed. They consisted of a single-room chapel. However, when our group came to interview members of the Macedonia congregation today, they were unable to relate to us any family stories or rumors of their ancestors' antebellum lives, because, to paraphrase one member of the Macedonia church who elected to remain anonymous, most families didn't want to pass on bad and potentially traumatic experiences. It was understood. In Texas, there were clear divides between life in urban areas and life in the more rural regions. The urban areas at this time were usually at a much closer proximity to smaller farms and waterways, whereas larger plantations retreated into the rural areas. Considering these differences, we discovered a significant deal of information on antebellum small farm life in Georgetown by comparing it with the more plantation-heavy culture of rural areas of Texas. According to Alwyn Barr's Black Texans, A History of Negroes in Texas, slaves in more urbanized areas, such as Georgetown, made up 50% of the slave population in Texas. Generally, these enslaved peoples resembled plantation slaves, except for the occasional break in social boundaries, allowing closer relationships between slaves and slaveholders to sometimes develop. This led owners to exhibit both paternalistic as well as supremacist behaviors and perspectives in regards to slaves, some infantilizing with their slaves and others treating them with apathy or active repugnance. One of the most astonishing discoveries, however, was the sheer lack of information regarding freedmen in Williamson County. There is little to no information remaining predating the Civil War. Even the Texas State Library archivist failed to produce any official documents on the subject. One archivist reported to us, "We don't have a list of freed people of color who lived in the various counties." The only recourse they proffered was to go through all petitions made to the Texas legislature during the late 19th century. Alwyn Barr also attempts to explain this historical hold by recognizing that there were many slaves who escaped to Mexico, and thus whose fates may never be determined. But even Barr doesn't approach the question of why there are no documents regarding other freedmen.
Going to make in a predominantly popular white culture. I think not all, but a lot of people felt it isn't going to make any difference. Me knowing how they felt, me knowing what they were going through, it isn't going to make any difference in my world.
When we first began this project, the prospect of not only understanding, but of communicating the possible experiences of African Americans in Georgetown seemed almost impossible. However, after meeting with Miss Pfeiffer, we recognized that though we cannot ever understand these experiences, we can learn more about them through conversation.
Starts with simple conversation. It doesn't necessarily start within the library and the stacks.